Have you ever thought, man, if I had somebody in my life, I could have avoided that circumstance? Let me tell you about a time in my life when I asked this question. I was a freshman in high school, and I loved skateboarding. Skateboarding was my life. Everything for me revolved around the skateboard. And my family, who's here this morning, can attest to how much I loved skateboarding. And they were unbelievably supportive and with this passion that I had. And looking back today, I realized that must have been absolutely terrifying to my parents, to which I'm very sorry. But this was my passion, and I loved skateboarding. But there is a close relative to skateboarding. And do you know what that is? I was going with pain. Falling, right? Agony. And when I reflect on all of the painful moments that I had skateboarding, there is one of them that stands far above the rest. And I was a freshman in high school, which meant I had to establish myself before my classmates. And I had a chip on my shoulder, and so I decided that I was going to show off a new trick that I had learned in front of my school when school was dismissed, as all of the kids were going to get onto their bus. And so the trick that I had learned was called a hard flip. And I meant to bring my skateboard this morning, but what it does is it's a kick flip, and then it kind of rotates counterclockwise. But when that happens, it has this kind of upward rotation to it. Well, on this particular occasion, I decided I was going to try to do this off of the curb as everybody was leaving through the door. And I had the rotation, and I was going off of the curb when the board kind of got hung up on the cement with the nose of the board pointing up. And I landed where no man should have to land. And I just laid on the ground. And to kind of help catch you up on the experience, I found a video of a person who went through a very similar experience of mine. And watch this video. And everybody is thinking, it is amazing he has 2 kids. I agree. And after I recovered from my pain and shame, I limped away, never wanting to be seen again. And I thought, man, if somebody had been there to say, Skyler, that's a dumb idea, don't do that. You are going to regret that. I could have avoided that painful experience and that embarrassing experience. How about for you? Have you ever wished that there was somebody in your life that can coach you through something, that can help you not do something or not say something? Have you ever been asked a question that you weren't quite sure what to say, so you just made something up? Have you ever had your mouth move faster than your mind, and you said something that you later regretted? Have you ever made an impulsive decision that looking back you realize that you can track a lot of damage in your life to that moment? Now here's something I learned from the sports world. You have 2 basic types of sports. You have solo sports and you have team sports. One of them you do all by yourself, and the other one you do with a group of people, with a team of people. One of them requires a group effort, group talent, and the other one requires individual talent. But both of them are better when there is coaching involved. Both of the team and the solo are better when there is somebody there to coach the person or the team through. And every successful solo competitor has been coached through those experiences. Now that's why they are where they are. But oftentimes when it comes to my life, when it comes to my faith, we tend to be under the impression that it's a solo sport and we don't need any coaching. We don't need any coaching on faith matters or life. And it's this sort of thinking that has brought us to experience what mental health experts are calling an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And in fact, in Europe, in Britain, they hired in January of this year into their government the first minister of loneliness to address this issue. Not only that, but they did a survey and they asked people to kind of identify certain questions, and they found that over 200,000 people went 30 days without seeing a person face to face. It's this sort of thinking that kind of has produced this epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And nobody rolls out of bed thinking, I sure hope today I feel alone and insignificant. No child grows up and hopes that they will follow their dreams only to realize that once they get them, that they feel empty and alone. But what if things did not have to turn out that way? What if the solution to a better life and a better faith is not found in a better me, it's not found in an improved me, but it is found in a better we? It is found in us. It is found in being together. What if somebody else has walked through the valleys that you are walking through, and they made it out on the other side, and they know how to do that? Would you want to know what it was that got them through that? Wouldn't you want them in your life to coach you through those difficult moments? There's a story about a guy who made it to the other side, but it wasn't by his efforts, it was by the efforts of others. And as a result, he had a better connection to God. The story is found in Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. How would you have liked to have been the host that day? I mean, you're preparing some refreshments for your guests. Jesus is pretty well known, so you're anticipating that he's going to have some visitors. And so, you add a couple more crackers to the crackers and some cheese and some salami, a little bit more to your party platter because you anticipate more people coming. And then there's a knock at the door, and so being the polite person, you go to the door, you open the door, only to encounter a stampede of people that just kind of flood your home, and the whole time you're thinking, they just keep coming. They're everywhere. And then Jesus does what he always does, and he just begins to teach them. And apparently news about Jesus' arrival spread through the entire town, because there's so many people in this man's house that luxury room, or that standing room is a luxury. And then they heard. They heard. So who are they? Verse 3. Some men came, bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was laying on. It is a group of 5 friends, and one of their friends is paralyzed. Was the man paralyzed from birth? Did the man experience some kind of neck or back injury while at work? Did the man have family that he needed to take care of? We don't know. But what we do know is that most people in the ancient world who were paralyzed, they would be taken to the busiest part of the city, which was the city gate, and there they could be laid so that they could beg for money in the baking heat. And the 4 men in our story, they would have been the same people who repeatedly carried this man day in and day out every day to the city gate, and then from the city gate back home. And imagine this for a moment. This guy's not on the street holding a sign because he's freeloading. He's not on the street because he chose it. He's probably laying on some flea-infested animal skin with a sign that's propped up against his lifeless limbs. And all day, people pass him by, not even noticing him, like he's completely invisible to society. Talk about a rough life. Talk about feeling alone. Talk about feeling isolated. Talk about feeling like nobody understands the pain that you feel. And I imagine that these four guys, they carry him several blocks into town just before heading to work. And when all of a sudden they lay the man down at the gate and they see tons of people leaving in droves out of the city, and they're going, what in the world is going on? So finally one of the friends stops somebody and says, what's happening? And he said, it's Jesus. Jesus is back. And all the guys have this light bulb moment where they look at each other and they think, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And so they have this quick powwow to talk about relocating their friend over to Jesus, and maybe Jesus could do something for him. And the man thinks, the paralyzed man thinks, well, I've heard about this Jesus guy. I'm at the end of my rope. My friends seem rather optimistic that he can do something. And, I don't have anything to lose at this point. So why don't we give it a try? And so off they went. And when they arrived, it is a packed house. You can't even, the outside is even packed. I mean, a kid might be able to squeeze through the legs of the people standing in the doorway, but not four men carrying a guy on a stretcher. And then one of them has the bright idea. Let's dig a hole in the roof. What were you, who came up with that idea? That's a crazy idea. But he just thinks, well, this makes sense. Let's just carve a hole right through that guy's roof. How would you like to have been the host that day? I mean, you're probably thinking in there, it is a zoo in my house. And then all of a sudden, clay from the ceiling falls in your eye, and you rub it out, and you look, and you see four men installing a new skylight for you. And I got to wonder, did the paralyzed man know the plans? Did he know that they were going to dig a hole in the roof and lower him down, or did they just pull one of those trust us, we have a plan moments? You know what I'm talking about? Where they don't tell you the details, they just say, trust us. Was that kind of the situation for him? And here's the amazing thing. The friends did not just hear about Jesus. They responded. They responded. They responded by taking their friend to Jesus. And when they were inconvenienced by circumstance, they responded by making another way to get to Jesus. Their mindset was, if life gives you closed doors, kick the door down. Or if life gives you a crowded house, dig a hole through the roof. And look at what happens next in verse 5. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, son, your sins are forgiven. And I wonder if the people in the house were initially frustrated at this scene. I wonder if they were irritated that their friends did this. I mean, couldn't they have just waited outside the house like they do at the city gate? Why did they interrupt Jesus in the middle of his teaching? I mean, can you imagine if somebody just said, stop the service right now? I got a question for the pastor. And most of us would be, how obnoxious. I wonder if they were thinking this. And so Jesus looks at this man who is clearly paralyzed. There's no mistake about that. He is being lowered through a roof by his friends. Their request for Jesus to heal this man could not be any more obvious than it is right then. And then Jesus looks at him and he says, your sins are forgiven. That's not what you expect. Why did Jesus start there? Jesus heals the man, but why did Jesus start by saying, your sins are forgiven? It makes you wonder, did Jesus know something about this man that was more paralyzing than his physical illness? And anyways, the religious leaders, when they hear Jesus say this, they are white hot mad about what Jesus said. Because according to the Jewish faith, the only person who has the right, the authority, and the power to forgive sins is God. And when Jesus says your sins are forgiven, he was claiming that very power, that very authority that only belongs to God. And they heard right. And Jesus knew exactly what they were thinking, and so he asked this question to them in verse 9. Which is easier, to say to this paralyzed man, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up, take your mat, and walk? And to prove that he has authority to forgive sins and display power over the physical world, he heals the man. He says, take up your mat and walk. And the man stands up, and perhaps for the very first time in his life, he walks out in front of everybody. And everyone's mouth drops to the floor and collects dust as they realize what had just happened. And the 5 friends, they came looking for a miracle, and then they met God. And here's the craziest detail of all. Notice what the text says in verse 5 of why this man was healed and why this man was forgiven. It says this, when Jesus saw his faith, their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, your son, your sins are forgiven. Jesus saw their faith. It wasn't just the paralyzed man's faith, it was all of their faith. Now, isn't that interesting? I thought that was interesting when I was looking at this. And as a result of their faith, they discovered God together. They discovered God together. There is something more profound, there is something more powerful when there is a we to my life, when there is a we to my faith, than when it is just about me. That there is something so powerful to our lives, to our faith, when it is not just me, but it is we. And Jesus notices that. And so let me ask you a question. When you have faced obstacles that are beyond your ability, they're beyond your knowledge to know what to do with them, what helped you get through it? What helped you solve that? When you are struck with such grief, with such pain, that you were not sure how to get through to tomorrow, what has brought you to today? I'm willing to bet for most of us, it was not grit, this rugged dedication and commitment, this endurance. I'm willing to bet it was people in your lives who cared for you. Like the paralyzed man whose friends came right alongside of him and carried him to Jesus, I bet that you had people in your life who carried you through those moments. And I'm almost certain that the very reason that you are here this morning is because of somebody else. Whether you know somebody who is here, or whether it was your Aunt Miss Obnoxious who wouldn't get off of your case, or this was your parents' church, I'm willing to bet that the reason you're here today is because of the faith of somebody else. And I'm willing to bet that the very reason that if you've accepted Jesus, the very reason that you did was because of the faith of somebody else, not just your faith alone. But somebody else believed that Jesus changed their life, and they believed that Jesus could do the same exact thing for you. And so you're here. You're here because Jesus changed somebody else's life, and that somebody believes that Jesus can change your life. Now, this is what happened for me. Growing up, I had a very awesome family. I had a very supportive and loving family. And one of the many things that they taught me was to think critically about what I believed and to think very critically about my own life. And while I wasn't lying out on a stretcher like the paralyzed man, I did not blindly believe things. And I did not accept something just because that was what somebody else said. And this has been a very helpful tool later on in life as I think deeply about my own beliefs. But I was really skeptical. I was really cautious and skeptical about God and religion. And I struggled to understand, I struggled to grasp how somebody can believe in an invisible God who had all authority, all power, and yet the world was in dismay. I had a hard time reconciling that. I had a hard time seeing how there could be this all-powerful God and yet the world is in shambles. I had a hard time seeing miracles as being true since I had not personally experienced one. And yet with things like science, I can actually experience something and I have this tangible reality in front of me. And for me, religion and God seemed like this hocus-pocus nonsense. I knew God did not exist. And in my head, I thought the only reason that people believe in God is because they are insecure and they have trouble coping with life's uncertainties and disappointments. And so they believe in something bigger. They believe in something higher to get them through. And then the weirdest thing happened to me. I started to feel empty inside. I started to feel lost. And I started to feel convicted over the decisions that I was making in my life. And then I had a few friends who came into my life, just like they came to the paralyzed man, that believed that Jesus changed their life and that Jesus could change my life. And they began inviting me to youth group. They began inviting me to church. They began inviting me to their small group where they would study, where they would pray, and where they would be together. And after much persistence, I finally went. And I still remember that first time going to church. It felt so uncomfortable. It felt so awkward. Nothing about the service to me made any sense, but there was something different. I felt this strange amount of peace, like this was what God was saying, this is the right direction, keep walking in it. And the moment for me that everything changed was during a very difficult time in my family's life, where my brother had just recently moved out, and we had not heard from him for a few days. And so I called and I contacted his roommate, and he told me that he was driving home from work when this belligerently drunk man stumbled into the road and stopped my brother's car and just began screaming and yelling and cussing at my brother, who my brother had no idea who this guy was. And then he went and he started hitting and kicking and punching my brother's car. And finally he stepped off of the curb. And my brother, with a flurry of emotions, he stepped on the gas pedal to squeal his tires and scare the guy and get out of there. Just then, the guy just kind of, I guess, stepped back in and just hit the car one last time. And my brother took off. And he came back. And the man wasn't hurt. My brother wasn't going very fast. But that night, the way it appeared, my brother went to jail. And there was a significant amount of charges that were racked up against my brother. And we were devastated. We were devastated and we were broke over the fact that we would not see our brother I would not see my brother for a long time. And all that week, I prayed like I have never prayed in my life. And I'm going around my school and I'm asking everybody, hey, pray for my brother. Pray for my brother. You're not a Christian. I don't care. Pray for my brother. I mean, it didn't matter what you believed at this point in my life. I just thought, man, my brother needs prayer, and you need to pray for him. And I remember the last night before my brother's final hearing, I broke down, and I just cried out to God, and I said, God, you know all things. You know the future. You know the past. You know what's going to happen. God, you know how this situation is going to turn out, but I just ask if there is any other way than this. Please let that happen. And not my will, but yours be done, God. And that next day, my brother called us after the final court verdict to tell us that the judge had dropped every single one of his charges and that he just had to take some driving safety classes. And for me, that was the moment that really changed my life. And from that point on, my brother's life changed too. And my brother is a very loving and caring father and husband, and I'm very proud of my brother for that. But it was that moment that I realized that the God my friends were trying to bring me to was not a made-up concept for comfort, but He was a real God who was eager to be involved in my life, who really wanted to change my life. And it was because of their faith that changed my fate and allowed me the opportunity to see God, to encounter God in a real way, that I was able to know God better through that experience rather than going about it all alone. And the more that I reflect on my story, the more I reflect on the story we find here today in my experience and what Jesus did on the cross, I am reminded that we really do connect better when we are together rather than when we are alone. And so how do we connect better to God? How do we connect better to God when we are together? First, others can see things that you cannot see. Others can see things that you cannot see. Just like the paralyzed man in our story, his friends saw what the paralyzed man did not see, an opportunity to be changed. And so often our lives are lived in hindsight. We think, man, if I only knew, if somebody had only been there. And what is hindsight for us is usually a predictable outcome for others. We may say, I never saw that coming, but others say it was only a matter of time. Because others can see things that are coming down the road a lot quicker than us a lot of times. Because others can identify our blind spots faster than us. They can see unhealthy habits or even hidden sins better than we can or better than we would like to admit. If you are a parent or you have spent any time longer than 5 minutes with a toddler, you get this. You tell the kid, hey, don't stand there, you're going to fall. Or hey, if you don't watch where you're walking, you're going to trip and faceplant, right? And most of the time, they don't listen, right? And what happens? They fall. And you get this really spiritual moment, this very precious moment as a parent, where you're going to go up to your kid and say with the most compassion and look them in the eye and say, I told you so. Right? And all parents look forward to this moment. It's because others can see things that you cannot see. Second, others can carry us when we cannot carry on. Others can carry us when we cannot carry on. Just like in our story, the paralyzed man could not get to Jesus. And so his friends made a way. They carried him to Jesus. And likewise, there are many times, and there will be many times in your life where you will not be able to do things on your own, and you will need somebody there to help you get through those moments, to carry you through those times. And here's the breathtaking truth. When we have people in our lives to help, it helps us understand things in a more personal way. It helps us grasp things in a little bit deeper way. We understand what forgiveness is really like. We understand what it means to really be loved when there is somebody else there to show us. For example, if you talk to a firefighter who saved victims of the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers, you will know that they have a more intimate, personal understanding of what sacrifice means than a teenage boy who crammed to study for a test the next day. There's just a different knowledge because of his experience. Because community helps the intangible become tangible. Community helps the intangible become tangible. That when we are together, we are able to show people forgiveness, show people love, and show people in a different way that they can understand in a more personal way. And going back to the words that Jesus spoke to the paralyzed man that really seem slightly odd and out of place for us when he said, "Your sins are forgiven," there was something that happened that day for that man. That he saw his life in a brand new light. And while we may want to jump all the way to the physical healing of this man, I think deep down we all experience a spiritual brokenness in all of our lives that we secretly hope can be fixed, that we secretly hope can be healed. I mean, it's why we feel empty. It's why we obsess over jobs and relationships and hobbies and experiences. It's because we are trying to mend the emptiness inside. But when we realize that we have not fixed anything with the things that we do, we either give up trying or we adopt this pessimistic mindset that there's no hope, there's no point. Life is just empty. Life is just broken. Life is just lonely. And the beautiful thing is this morning is that the words that Jesus spoke to the man was exactly what he needed to hear, and it's the words that we desperately want to be true for our lives. You know, Jesus died on the cross not because he took pity on us, not because he felt bad for us, but because that was the only way Jesus could save us. On the cross, Jesus traded his perfect life for our imperfect life. On the cross, Jesus traded our sin for his perfection. That all of our brokenness, all of our pain, all of our hurt, all of our insecurities, all of our muck and imperfection, Jesus took that on the cross that we could have his life, that we could actually know the God who made us. And God's desire is not to make our lives better. It's not to make us feel better about our lives. It's to actually give us life. It's to give us new life. And when our lives are lived in surrender to him, Jesus reminds us the words that he spoke to the paralyzed man when he said, "Son, your sins are forgiven," are true for us. And Jesus gives us a community of people who can guide us when we cannot see, who can give us wisdom and direction when we don't know where to go or what to do. God gives us a community of people who can carry us when we cannot walk. When we feel so low that we struggle to get out of bed, Jesus gives us a community to help us walk. And he gives us strength when we feel too weak to move. But to do that, it requires a complete and total surrender to him. And to surrender the mindset that I can do this as a solo thing. That this life, this faith thing, that we surrender and say, it is not better when it is just me, but it is better when we are together. And we surrender the mindset of treating the faith and life as a solo sport.